I am Charlie. This phrase went viral in the aftermath of the attacks on the French satirical newspaper office this week. People declared, I am Charlie, on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and even in person at protests and vigils held around Europe and elsewhere in the world, including here in our country. Commentators and reporters are quick to remind us that actually this paper printed a lot of things that a lot of people didn't like. Its business was satire and use of cartoons to make important political and social commentary, and it was often offensive. So all these people saying, I am Charlie, what were these people doing by naming themselves Charlie this week? What is in a name? The Torah portion this week, Shemot, means names. Shemot is the first Torah portion in the book of Exodus, and it begins with a list of names of the children of Jacob who came to Egypt during the famine. The number of people who came to Egypt during that time, as each brother of Joseph brought his entire family to the food, came to 70 in total. And then the Torah says Joseph died, and all his brothers, and all that generation. But the Israelites were fertile and prolific. They multiplied and increased very greatly so that the land was filled with them. What we get is a list, a long and specific list of names: Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Judah, followed by the information that every one of these people died. And then we get several words that indicate a general swarming of people. Multiplied, increased, the land was filled with them, and none of them have any names. One of our great Torah commentators, Sforno, points out the contrast between these two ways of talking about these different generations of our biblical ancestors. There are the ones whose names we know, the generation who came to Egypt and brought their families, and then there are the ones who swarmed the earth after them, a nameless, reputationless bunch of people. And these are the ones who became enslaved. They were different than their ancestors, Sforno writes, because they didn't make a name for themselves, didn't earn honorable mention, were only interested in growing and in material gain. He writes that the ones whose names we never get in the Torah, the ones who simply multiplied and swarmed, ran through their lives, he says, in a headlong rush towards the abyss. Their lives had no meaning, no substance, no depth, only breadth. It's actually a fairly stunning indictment of the generation who first became slaves in Egypt. Sforno is basically saying they were enslaved because of their own lack of attention to what really matters. They became objects of Pharaoh because they objectified everything around them, only interested themselves in numerical, quantifiable growth. They didn't even bother to name one another or grant one another simple humanity. Or if they did, their names aren't even worth mentioning in the Torah. They don't mean anything. Sforno is only one of many commentators who talk at length about the beginning of our ancestors' enslavement in Egypt, but his commentary is rather unique among the others because of its placement of at least some of the blame, some of the guilt for that situation on the Israelites themselves. It is not all a function of an evil Pharaoh, Sforno says. Some of it was a function of a group of people who lost its way and stopped standing for anything. Scholars have looked at his commentary and asked themselves, why would he do this? Why would he blame the obvious victims in this story? What is the benefit of passing around the guilt and responsibility like that? And one very compelling answer I read was that there is an educational value in doing this. By saying that our ancestors made some wrong moves and essentially enslaved themselves to materialism before Pharaoh did it to them, gives us, their descendants, something to learn from. It prevents us from simply sitting around and feeling victimized and feeling a sense of despair about what happened to them. It calls on us to examine ourselves and think about our past and our future as something we have some control over. We always joke, parenthetically, about Jewish guilt, and we walk around inflicting it on one another and feeling it deeply, but our Torah and the rabbis who passed it down to us seem to assert that there is some benefit to feeling guilty, that perhaps all of those wonderful Jewish mothers who make us feel bad for the things that we do are actually trying to remind us that we do have some control over our lives. We do have some responsibility to bear, and actually that's a fairly inspiring message. And once we start looking at our lives that way, inner growth becomes necessary, part of the equation to achieve personal redemption. So this is the way we begin to look at the second book of the Torah and begin to progress towards Passover. Looking at the beginning of the Exodus story this way actually performs a bit of a magic trick and makes the story about more than just history. If we look at the experience of slavery as a place that our people descended into when they stopped caring about the stuff that really matters, it stops being a story just about them. It starts to be a story about each of us, about who we are, about what we stand for, about how we can live better and free ourselves throughout our lives. I am Charlie, so many said this week. This statement performs the same magic trick as Sforner's commentary. We could, and probably have at times, slipped into despair about the state of the world, about the state of our people, about the state of everything that we see around us. But in the face of that despair, and in the face of that helplessness, and in the face of that sense of victimization, what this saying is reminding us, and what these people who use it are saying, I believe, is not, I love everything that the newspaper ever printed. Rather, it is, I have a name, and it's justice, and it's freedom of expression, and it's nonviolent protest, and it is honesty and integrity. And I will fight to protect my name in every way. Giving ourselves a name in our generation, as so many were moved to do and will continue to be moved to do, brings us one step closer to achieving that personal redemption, the redemption of ourselves. And if we look to our Torah portion this week, we realize that the name is everything. And standing up and saying, this is my name, and this is what I stand for, brings about not just the redemption of people in a story, but the redemption of us as individuals and one another. Amen.